Hello and welcome to Boxset, Binge the Bible, the podcast from Seven Vineyard, where we are listening through the entire Bible in a year. It's a lot to get through, but it's making a big impact on us. And my name is Bern, Leckie, joined by Owen, Lynch.
Hello there.
I've been especially struck this week as we've been looking at the prophet Isaiah, one of the most famous of all prophets in history, one of the biggest books in the Bible as well. I've been especially struck just thinking about the situation that he was writing into. And can I imagine it? Can I get my head around it? Do you know the kind of situation I got in mind?
Go for it. What's that?
Well, this was all being processed and digested by Israel, by a people who were facing, I think, an almost unimaginable trauma. It wasn't just that God was sort of saying some things to them, and on the religious page of their newspapers there'd be God might want us to do something different. No, they were facing all this and they were processing all this when they were in the context of being exiled from their homes and their land. Because that's a far away thing and far away in time, it kind of looks like just like a little historical bump in the road. Oh yeah, that's when the exile happened. But can we imagine it for a second? Can you just imagine if it happened to us? Imagine if it was like someone came along, some big power, maybe Russia or whoever, and said to everyone in Britain, right, you're going to leave. We've got jobs for you. They're down some salt mines in Siberia somewhere. We'll take you there. Meanwhile, all this stuff that you grew up with, that house that you thought was yours, well, it's ours now. Your family too. They're going to come. Now, how would we react to that?
Well, I agree. It's horrific. And frankly, I wrote at the top of my page when I was listening to this, it just reminded me of the situation with Russia invading Ukraine. Now, how do the people of Ukraine feel right now, with an aggressor on their doorstep? This is exactly the sort of situation that we hear Isaiah speaking into, and it's just horrific. It's a time of great national trauma, and also individual personal trauma as well, right?
Absolutely. And I really can't honestly say I could imagine us reacting to that well without being angry, without arguing about it, without just profoundly rejecting the injustice of it all. And then for someone to come along and say this was somehow our fault, how would you react to that?
Yeah, that would be a bit strange.
Yeah, but that's the context that Isaiah and the prophets are speaking into. And so it's a very, very difficult message, I think, for people to hear, to imagine people taking well. And one of the things I think I would probably do with my faith, if this actually happened here, would be to pull up my faith and point to my God and say, God, how could you let this happen? Aren't we faithful? Aren't we worshipping you? Aren't we depending on you? Aren't we trusting you? And that makes the beginning of Isaiah even sharper, even more painful.
I agree. And, personally, I think I've often thought of the prophets a bit like the opposition. We've just had an election here in the UK and we've got a new Labour government now. And on the other side of the box is the opposition led by Rishi Sunak. And it was a bit strange to see the roles reversed with the parties in different places. And for me, the opposition, the prophets are like opposition. They're like speaking truth to the kings and the leaders of Judah and Israel and all the 12 tribes. And for me, their voice is this like, look, we've got a problem here and this is why it's happened. And for me, Ben, what stands out first and foremost is the reason why this has happened is because the 12 tribes of Israel, I don't know why I keep saying 10, the 12 tribes of Israel have neglected the values and the principles and the priorities of their religious culture, and they've abandoned these things that are important to Yahweh, which is justice and righteousness, particularly for those who are peripheralized, marginalized, and most vulnerable in society. I think that it's clear that Isaiah is saying, this is happening because you guys, you rich and powerful, even you middle classes, you working class, you have forgotten what is important, and that is to take care of the vulnerable and the weak in society and to ensure justice for all. That's why this is happening. And I think that there's an element to which if there was a debate in Parliament about a more powerful nation like attacking the UK, there would be this debate. Why has this happened? What have we done that has actually led to the situation that we're in? And I think that's what we're seeing here with Isaiah, because his argument is principally with the kings. It's with the rulers and authorities in these different tribes, right?
Yeah. So in chapter 5, Isaiah sort of puts it very directly and says, from God, he said, my people will go into exile for lack of understanding. For those of high rank will die of hunger, and the common people will be parched with thirst. Therefore, death expands its jaws, and people will be brought low and humbled. And okay, so it sounds kind of like from a distance. From a distance, this looks like, oh yes, well, God was doing a thing, and he was telling people how important it was. And I'm just trying to imagine it not from such a distance, and quite what a wrench it was. And Isaiah, the way Isaiah opens up as well with the multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me, says the Lord? I've had more than enough of burnt offerings. And when you spread out your hands, I hide my eyes from you. Your hands are full of blood. To me, that really speaks of not just like the message that you can discern from it, which is, God saying, look, my principles are important. Social justice is important. Okay, it's more important than religion in itself. But it's the personal pain, I think, that people had invested themselves in their idea of religion. They'd invested themselves in doing all the worship stuff. They'd kept raising up their hands, praying, thinking they were doing the right thing. But it's the pain for them of God being able to demonstrate, and how God demonstrates to them how they can know that they got it wrong. That they can know that they got it wrong because of the injustice, because of the oppressed. So learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. It strikes me, if those aren't the things that for us are front of mind whenever we think of God, whenever we think of church, whenever we think of religion, are we doing those things? If those aren't the primary things, aren't we just in danger of making the same mistake?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point that, as a church that would be classified as a charismatic evangelical church, particularly this church that Claire and I lead here, Seven Vineyard, I think there is this sense for me very much that charismatic evangelicals have lost sight of that. That there's a sense for us that we've lost sight of the important values, the things that are most important to God, and that we need to be focused as people on caring for those in society that cannot care for themselves, cannot speak up for themselves. There's a sense for me that we kind of focus instead on ephemeral things that aren't really practical and material in our day-to-day life, and there'll be there would be some charismatic evangelicals who would criticize me for even saying that, and would say no, you really are missing the point here. This is about righteousness and justice in a kind of bigger picture, in a kind of an eternal context. And I'm like, well, that might be true, but the practical reality is it's in the day to day, and that's the world I live in. I don't know about you. I tend to live in the day to day, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not living in an ephemeral world that's detached from reality. In fact, the early Christians were quite keen to emphasize the fact that absolutely wasn't the essence of this movement that was based on Jesus Christ. This was actually very much rooted in the practical reality. And as we see in Jesus, of course, as Christians, we recognize that Jesus himself gave the same message. Guys, you are not standing up for the poor, the needy, the peripheralized, the marginalized, the vulnerable. And in fact, he spent most of his time with those people, lifting them out of poverty, lifting them out of economic and social ostracization. He restored people to life and gave them their lives back in the present. And of course, Christians, we believe that that extends beyond the present, but the reality is Jesus lived in the present and acted in the present. And I think we see that very much here in Isaiah.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Jesus in the context of Isaiah, because Isaiah is probably one of the prophets who most clearly points the way to Jesus, and something, at least, that Jewish people, ever since the time of Isaiah, have always believed that God would do. Now, not everyone has recognised that in Jesus, that's for sure. But I think the important thing is when prophets in the Old Testament deliver these big messages of God is going to do a thing and it's going to be awkward and painful and difficult, there is always a message of hope as well. There's always this hope that God is providing for people. And I love how that comes up in Isaiah, like in chapter 9. There will be, pointing ahead, there will be no more gloom for those who are distressed. In the past, he humbled these people and these people, but in the future, he will honour Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea. That's in chapter 9. And then we get into the really famous bit, the bit that gets quoted at Christmas now. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. Woo! Okay, now it's starting to sound good, isn't it? And imagine you're the people in exile. Imagine this is us, and we're just sort of choking over our latest, salt minings. And to have this hope that there is restoration ahead and justice ahead, and the things that we, even once we've taken on board the idea that we might have somehow got ourselves into this mess, the idea that God provides a way out, and it's not just a way back to where we were, but it's a way ahead to something even better. I think that's quite amazing and very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we see here, just in the first 27 chapters of Isaiah, is a rich vein of theology that certainly Jesus, his followers, and the early church in the sort of first, second century, they mined this deeply. Really did. And you can see that, just as you say, just the gospel writers. I think Matthew particularly quotes Isaiah repeatedly, and it's a deep, rich shaft of theology that they dug in order to present Jesus as the Messiah and as the suffering servant. We'll talk more about that perhaps in our future podcasts on Isaiah. But nevertheless, as you say, we see this hope described in Isaiah 9, which is such an incredible description, and would have been such an incredible description for those who were facing annihilation or at least exile. And I think Isaiah's really significant opening chapters, 1 to 12, are this contrast between judgment and hope. Scholars think that Isaiah, this particular first part of Isaiah, that Isaiah himself was speaking to King Ahaz in Jerusalem and was warning him that the annihilation by the Assyrian Empire that was actually suffered by the 10 tribes in the northern kingdom was actually potentially facing Jerusalem. And I think what he says to Ahaz is, this could happen, but there is hope. And indeed we know that actually Assyria didn't invade the southern kingdom of Judah and Benjamin. It would be later, 120 years later, that the Babylonian kingdom that usurped the Assyrian Empire, that conquered the Assyrian Empire, they rose in power, and then they attacked the southern kingdom and carried them off into exile. But what we see here in about 720 BC is Isaiah warning King Ahaz, who was the king of the southern kingdom. What's happening to the northern kingdom could happen to the southern kingdom, but there's hope. There's hope that this doesn't have to be this way, and that God will intervene and will restore. And it must have been incredibly encouraging for those people hearing this, because they could see the geopolitical landscape changing before their very eyes, and yet Isaiah was saying, but God, Yahweh is faithful. Yahweh will not forget you. God, Yahweh will restore you, and that must have been incredibly encouraging for them.
I think so, and I'm really struck as well how in chapter 11 the hope that's there for the future is distinctly not, it goes well beyond restoration. It goes into new life. This is chapter 11 that starts with a shoot will come up from the stump. And so you've got this idea that they've been cut down, but new life is going to come from it, and this new life is sort of seems personified as well. The shoot that comes up is described as a person. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. He will delight in the fear of the Lord. And then Isaiah talks about how this judgment and righteousness will be a justice thing. It's not going to be primarily looking like a religious thing. It's certainly not going to look like the old things they had. It's going to look like new things where the wolf will lie down with the lamb and the leopard will lie down with the goat, and all that kind of amazing imagery that sounds fantastic. It sort of points to something that sounds too good to be true, right? You think, this couldn't possibly happen. Could God really do all of this?
Yeah.
And where it points to sort of geopolitically is God raising a banner for the nations, gathering up the exiles of Israel, assembling the scattered people from the four corners of the earth. So it's directly a hope from Israel, but it's also this promise, this faith that they can have that Israel is going to be a blessing for the whole world, and that long-standing promise is actually going to get fulfilled. As for what it would look like, as for whether people would recognise this hope when it comes along, that's another big question. And I think that's one we can dig into a bit more next time, because it looked like people were expecting something military, some sort of strengthening. And Isaiah's got more to say about that directly, about a new way of life. It's going to look very new. He says, forget the former things, don't dwell on the past, I'm doing a new thing. And that's going to be part of the chapters that we look at next week.
Great, so that's what we'll look at next week. Do listen on, and we'll look forward to joining you then.
Bye.